In the heat of battle, a single moment may fill an eternity.
Hello guys, and welcome to another video. And this one we're going to take a look at timeless jewels, and more specifically the timeless keystones that these jewels provide. These are special keystone passive skills that are limited by choice to only a single one because you can't socket multiple timeless jewels onto your passive tree. And when you socket a timeless jewel onto the passive tree, it will dominate all the passives in its radius, including keystones, which will be transformed into a new keystone which you can then allocate, and that keystone is based on the type of timeless jewel and the name that's attached to that jewel. And the reason I want to discuss these timeless keystones now is because of something that happened in patch 3.21. But just quickly before we get into that, look at the stats. About 90% of you that watch this channel regularly are not subscribed. That's crazy. If you enjoy the videos, please do subscribe, and if you really like them, click the bell too. Anyway, enough of that, and let's get into it. You see, in 3.21 Crucible League, GGG took the opportunity to overhaul some old League mechanics. They focused on Breach and Abyss in particular. These changes were cited as updating old League content to better fit the current version of Path of Exile, and essentially these updates were attempting to increase the difficulty of both Breach and Abyss, whilst also improving their rewards to make them more relevant in modern Path of Exile. Now, I'm not sure if this is exactly how it turned out, and I'll probably get into discussing these changes in a bit more detail in another video. But the important thing here is that GGG made this change, and the improvement of old League content is on their radar in the run-up to Path of Exile 2. And that got me thinking, which other older leagues can we expect to see changes to? And which will we see the back of, perhaps for good? I started to think a lot about Legion, and the timeless jewels that are exclusive to this content. These timeless jewels have become an extremely important part of Path of Exile. They're a mainstay in a huge majority of builds, and whilst you can argue that some of the timeless keystone passives could be reworked or removed with minimal reaction from the community, some of the other stronger keystones are vital components in many current builds. And so what would a Legion League content overhaul look like? Well, just like with Breach and Abyss, I could see more difficult encounters with changes to the exclusive loot, and that would likely mean changes to timeless jewels. The last time GGG performed a sweeping balance pass on timeless jewel keystones was all the way back in 3.11 Harvest League, where they moved 5 timeless keystones to the passive tree. The Agnostic, Glancing Blows, Supreme Ego, Wind Dancer, and Eternal Youth all found a new home in various locations around the core passive tree. And in their place, 5 new timeless keystone jewels to replace them on the timeless jewels themselves. The Traitor, Supreme Ostentation, Chainbreaker, Transcendence, and Immortal Ambition. This was an exciting change, but all of this happened 10 leagues ago. So what about the list of timeless keystone jewels in the current Path of Exile? We all know about Divine Flesh and Tempered by War, the Traitor, and Corrupted Soul. These keystones and others are used very often in a huge variety of builds, because they're good, they're impactful. But what about the forgotten timeless keystones, the ones that people rarely ever use, if ever? Let's take a closer look at those, beginning with Dance with Death. This one comes from the Brutal Restraint jewel when it's in the name of Asenath. It gives you lucky critical strike chance and lucky damage with critical strikes, but you get 2 downsides as well. Enemies have lucky damage with critical strikes against you, and worse still, you can't use a helmet. Now don't get me wrong, some players have messed around with this keystone a little bit. I know Mathil made a Deadeye build using this keystone back in Sanctum League, but realistically, the loss of the helmet slot in current Path of Exile is just far too big of a trade-off. Whether it's stats like physical damage taken as, or things like mana reservation efficiency of skills, or even uniques like Heat Shiver, the helmet slot is incredibly valuable, and I think this keystone has aged quite poorly with the addition of things like influenced mods and eldritch implicits. And what about Second Sight? This one also comes from the Brutal Restraint jewel in the name of Nasima. You are blind, and blind doesn't affect your light radius, and you get 25% more melee critical strike chance. I mean, this one is perhaps even worse than Dance with Death, all you get is the more critical strike chance, and it's specific to melee as well, and you need to solve being blinded. And I mean, most builds going crit will cap critical strike chance anyway, so this one is incredibly weak. And I think this one would make for an interesting addition to the passive skill tree, where you'll be able to take this while you transition to crit on a melee build, and it's going to help you a bit with the transition while your gear is a bit weaker. But overall, there's no way that this keystone is worthy of a timeless keystone dual slot. And then there's Chainbreaker. Now this keystone had its time in the sun, especially in 3.12 and 3.13, where it featured heavily on many attack and spell builds using Berserk and the divergent quality Berserk with great uptime thanks to the massive amounts of rage generation that this keystone can provide. But ever since its nerf in 3.14 and the subsequent rework in 3.19, it's hardly been used at all. And that's because even though the rage regeneration converted from mana regeneration mechanic can be incredibly strong in keeping up Berserk with a crazy uptime, the rage cost of your skills is very limiting and somewhat painful to build around. You can do it, but it requires some heavy investment. And I think in many ways the Calm Spirit gloves have really replaced what Chainbreaker used to do on a lot of builds, without that huge rage cost penalty. And that's why a massive 12% of all players in the Softcore Trade Crucible League are using these gloves. But really, I think the concept of trading off mana recovery for rage recovery and then rage becoming your main resource for skill use is an interesting one, but one that needs work, and it could really do with more ways to support this kind of archetype. And I think a revised version of this keystone would be a very interesting addition to the base passive tree as well. But once again, I feel that this keystone really falls short of what a timeless keystone passive should be. And there's some other timeless keystones as well that I think are useful but not anywhere near as impactful as the stronger options, things like Supreme Grandstanding, Power of Purpose, and Supreme Ostentation. And with a view to the possibility of GGG overhauling more older League content in the future, could we see a league like Legion getting this treatment? And will we see another sweeping balance pass of the timeless keystone passives, or maybe even some bigger changes? I think only time will tell, but the idea of some of these keystones making their way to the core passive tree makes for some very interesting theory craft with all of the possibilities that might provide. What do you guys think of the current list of timeless keystone passives that we have available to us? Do you think we'll see an overhaul of Legion content in the near future? And which of the current timeless dual keystones would you like to see moved onto the passive tree? Let me know down in the comment section below. And as always, stay tuned and stay safe.